As the first light of dawn filters gently through the ancient stained glass windows of the Apostolic Palace, a profound moment unfolds that touches the soul of every devoted Catholic worldwide. This very morning in the Vatican, an event of extraordinary significance has taken place, one that stirs deep emotion and righteous concern among the faithful, prompting many to pause and reflect on the enduring strength of their beliefs. An unprecedented spiritual upheaval has erupted at the very heart of Christianity, leaving nothing as it once was. Prepare your heart and mind, for what is about to be shared carries the potential to reshape the landscape of Catholicism across the globe in a complete and lasting manner. A far-reaching papal decree has emerged like a bolt of divine clarity, challenging and uprooting long-standing traditions that once appeared immutable. The practice of religiosity, familiar to humanity for centuries, now stands at a decisive turning point, with no possibility of return. Within the quiet solemnity of his private chapel, the Holy Father has issued 10 direct and powerful directives, authentic spiritual summons, that echo now in Catholic households everywhere. These commands call for the immediate end to certain practices that have guided and formed the faith of millions across generations. Dear brothers and sisters in faith, drawn together by this shared journey, we warmly invite you to join our community. Subscribe today, share in the comments the city from which you connect with us, and kindly write your name so that we may unite in prayer for your life and intentions. In this sacred setting, 8 months after his historic election, the Vicar of Christ concludes his morning prayers. What he promulgates is already regarded within Vatican corridors as the most radical encyclical of modern times. Cardinal Martinis, his trusted spiritual advisor, stands nearby with visible anticipation, clutching a leather briefcase that holds the finalized apostolic letter. Soon, this document will reach the hands and hearts of 1.3 billion Catholics around the world. Pope Leo XIV rises thoughtfully from his kneeler, his distinctive Chicago accent still present despite years of global service. The Holy Church has lost too much time favoring earthly comfort over the truth of the gospel, he states with solemn conviction, adjusting his simple white cassock. A humble choice that has taken the place of the more ornate vestments favored by earlier pontiffs. This transformation, born from sincere pastoral care, reminds us all of our shared humanity and the personal call to deeper fidelity in our spiritual lives. The morning report sent by the dicasteries had brought concerning data. Attendance at the Holy Eucharist continued to decline. Materialism was growing even among the baptized, and what he defined as a Christianity of appearances was beginning to quietly infiltrate parish communities worldwide. His Augustinian formation, strengthened during his years of mission in Peruvian lands, had taught him that spiritual authenticity always demands uncomfortable sacrifices, never convenient adaptations. At that moment, the Secretary of Pontifical Communications, Sister Catherine O'Brien, enters bringing urgent news from the Vatican Department of Communication. Holy Father, monitoring of digital platforms shows that the faithful already sense an important announcement is approaching. The topic related to Your Holiness is going viral all over the world. The pontiff nods gravely. He fully understands the enormous weight of the words he is about to utter. His experience as prefect of the dicastery for bishops allowed him to discover the immense gulf between the official doctrine of the Church and the way many Catholics actually live their faith. That void is about to be confronted with a clarity never seen before. As he walks toward his private office, the successor of Peter ponders the 10 concrete practices he is determined to prohibit definitively. Each one represents, according to his discernment, an abandonment of the revolutionary gospel message regarding renunciation, service, and fraternity. His spiritual advisors had already warned him that several of these decisions would provoke massive resistance, especially among affluent congregations and highly influential ecclesial organizations. However, the years he spent serving among the poorest in the most remote regions of Peru taught him a truth impossible to ignore. The credibility of the Church depends on authentic witness, not popularity. "The gospel was never meant to be comfortable," he murmurs as he slowly opens the leather folder that is destined to forever change the life of global Catholicism. Sister Catherine checks the international distribution plan one last time. The pontifical letter will be published simultaneously across 6 continents, translated into 47 languages, and distributed directly to every pastor, bishop, and cardinal in the world. Leo XIV's instructions are absolutely clear. There will be no advance access for the press, no diplomatic presentations, and no modifications according to cultural or regional sensitivities. "This message will reach everyone at the exact same time," he commanded categorically. That unprecedented coordination reflected a firm resolve that no Catholic community could claim ignorance or delay its implementation. The first practice Leo XIV decides to confront is the accumulation of unnecessary wealth by ecclesiastical institutions. Every religious organization that hoards while the poor continue to suffer directly contradicts the fundamental teaching of Christ, the document states. Parishes maintaining disproportionate financial reserves must redistribute their resources to local aid programs for the most needy within a maximum period of 90 days. Dioceses that continue to retain costly art collections, while their faithful suffer severe economic hardship, will be subject to immediate intervention by the Vatican. The directive explicitly mentions those basilicas that have invested millions in restorations, while in the very same cities, homeless shelters continue to lack funding. At that moment, Cardinal Rossi hastily enters the pontifical apartments with alarming news from the Vatican Bank. "Holy Father, if we apply this directive on wealth redistribution, 17 major dioceses will lose their primary sources of funding in less than 6 months." Leo XIV continues writing. His pen does not stop for a single moment. He barely looks up and responds with absolute serenity. "Cardinal, the early church thrived without bank accounts." He pauses briefly and adds, "Perhaps modern Catholicism needs to remember that lesson." The Italian cardinal's face changes completely. He understands that the pontiff's determination is unwavering. The American Pope had spent decades living among impoverished communities in Peru. Compared to that reality, the financial concerns of the Vatican seemed insignificant, as the implications of these directives settle upon the hearts of believers. The second prohibition strikes at what Pope Leo XIV describes as spiritual materialism. This refers to the troubling tendency to treat religious objects, ceremonies, and sacred rites as mere commodities to be purchased, displayed, or consumed for personal gratification, rather than as genuine instruments of authentic devotion. Under this new measure, luxury religious items, devotional objects marketed at exorbitant prices to affluent buyers, and exclusive religious tourism packages that emphasize comfort and opulence over the humble spirit of pilgrimage are all strictly prohibited. The apostolic letter pointedly condemns those religious stores that commercialize blessed articles at inflated costs, reducing profound symbols of faith to ordinary commercial goods. In his own words, Leo XIV writes with clarity and conviction, "When we turn the sacred into merchandise, we end up emptying it of its true meaning." One can only imagine the ripple of unease spreading through the Vatican as news of the decree begins to leak along its historic corridors. Telephones in the pontifical residence ring without pause. The chief executive of a prominent religious publishing house urgently seeks an audience, visibly alarmed that restrictions on certain religious products could drive his enterprise toward bankruptcy. Simultaneously, a coalition of presidents from leading Catholic universities voices deep concern regarding potential constraints on their established fundraising practices. Several American bishops, meanwhile, request urgent clarification concerning the investments held by their dioceses. Yet Pope Leo XIV declines every meeting, offering his secretary a single, unwavering instruction: respond to each inquiry with the same resolute phrase, "The gospel does not need to consult those who profit from it." As evening descends upon the Eternal City, reports from Vatican security highlight unusual activity gathering around St. Peter's Square. International television crews converge on Rome despite the absence of any official announcement. Catholic influencers host live broadcasts, earnestly speculating on the full scope of the revelation expected the following day. In various quarters of the city, informal wagers circulate as people attempt to anticipate the precise contents of this mysterious pontifical directive. Through it all, within the quiet sanctuary of the papal apartments, Leo XIV remains steadfastly absorbed in his pastoral labors. He pays no heed to the mounting commotion beyond his windows. His many years of missionary service had long ago impressed upon him an enduring truth. Truth first stirs turbulence, before it ultimately bestows peace. The third practice firmly condemned by the Holy Father is what he terms selective moral indignation, the inconsistent stance of those Catholics who vocally oppose certain church teachings, while conveniently overlooking others that challenge their personal comforts or interests. The document candidly addresses individuals who staunchly defend the life of the unborn, yet endorse economic policies that leave countless families in poverty. It likewise highlights those who profess to uphold Christian marriage while profiting from businesses rooted in usury or profound injustice. Moral consistency can never be optional, writes Leo XIV. We cannot defend life inside the womb while denying the dignity of the worker. In the midst of these weighty reflections, Cardinal Thompson, an old and trusted companion of the pontiff arriving from Chicago, lands on an emergency flight after receiving partial details of the apostolic letter. Upon entering the office, he speaks with frank urgency. "Robert, you are going to destroy the Catholic Church in the United States." He addresses the Pope deliberately by his baptismal name. Leo XIV lifts his gaze slowly, his expression steady, yet filled with compassionate resolve. "Tom," he replies, "perhaps the American Catholic Church needs to be destroyed if it has come to be confused with American capitalism." The cardinal stands motionless for several moments before departing in silence. In that quiet exit, he recognizes that his longtime friend has grown into a figure of far greater firmness and decisive purpose than many had ever anticipated. The fourth practice Leo XIV decided to ban was what he termed Ceremonial Christianity, the custom of attending religious celebrations, participating in liturgical feasts, and taking part in parish activities primarily for social, cultural, or networking reasons, rather than seeking a true spiritual transformation. During his years of service in the Vatican administration, Leo XIV had observed this phenomenon on countless occasions. He had seen how many Catholics turned attendance at Holy Mass into an opportunity for professional networking, and how various religious festivities ended up being transformed into mere social events. The directive demands that parishes eliminate any practice that prioritizes social prestige over spiritual growth, including reserved seating based on donation amounts and exclusive religious events for the wealthiest benefactors. When the clock struck midnight, Leo XIV wrote the final paragraph of his 10-point document. The final words were destined to travel across the entire world. They would be quoted by newspapers, journalists, and commentators within hours. The Church exists to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. When we invert that mission, we betray Christ himself. After writing that sentence, the pontiff carefully closed the document. He took the papal ring, that ring that still felt unfamiliar on his hand, and personally sealed the apostolic letter. The next morning, global Catholicism would experience an unprecedented shock. But that night, in the deep silence of his private chapel, the first pope born in the United States knelt once again to pray. He knew he had just written the exact words God had asked him to speak. Morning arrived, accompanied by unusual storms over the city of Rome, as if the sky itself were preparing for the spiritual earthquake about to shake the Catholic world. At 9 a.m., Vatican time, Leo XIV's 10-point directive had already arrived simultaneously in every corner of the planet. It had been translated, distributed, and delivered through the parish network the Church had built over centuries. The title of the document seemed surprisingly simple: 10 Practices That End Today. However, its content was destined to become the most radical papal intervention in contemporary Catholic practice. The fifth practice, banned by Leo XIV, was what he termed charity as an excuse. The idea that making generous donations to religious works releases a Catholic from the responsibility of fighting injustices present in their personal and professional life. Wealthy business owners who funded church construction while maintaining abusive working conditions for their employees. Politicians who supported Catholic charities but voted against laws guaranteeing a living wage for workers. All of them were to be subject to public ecclesiastical censure. Charity can never compensate for injustice, wrote the Holy Father. We cannot build the kingdom of God while continuing to participate in systems that continue to oppress his children. Just hours after the document's publication, Catholic social media exploded into unprecedented chaos. The name of Leo XIV quickly became the most talked about religious topic in the world. Reactions ranged from overwhelming enthusiasm to equally intense indignation. Progressively inclined Catholic organizations hailed the document as an authentic prophetic act. Meanwhile, various traditionalist groups accused the pontiff of endangering ecclesiastical authority. Phone lines at the Vatican were completely overwhelmed. Bishops requested urgent clarifications. Journalists requested interviews. Thousands of the faithful called to express gratitude or voice deep concern. The sixth prohibition addressed intellectual pride within the faith, the attitude of those who use their theological knowledge, religious training, or academic background as a reason to feel superior to other Catholics whose faith is expressed in simpler ways. The years Leo XIV spent among indigenous communities in Peru had allowed him to discover an enormous spiritual wisdom hidden precisely in that simplicity. For this reason, the directive condemned any form of religious elitism, especially that which despises popular piety, the traditions of the people, or simple expressions of faith, considering them inferior to academic theology. God's truth is never limited by a human being's level of education, written by Leo XIV. Meanwhile, Catholic institutions worldwide called emergency meetings. Administrators tried desperately to understand the practical consequences of the new rules. Officials at major universities analyzed the future of their endowments. Catholic hospitals began reviewing their billing systems to adapt to the new teaching. Parish councils debated whether their financial reserves could be considered excessive, and the silence from the Vatican only heightened the uncertainty. Whenever someone requested clarification, the answer was always the exact same: return to the original document. The seventh practice banned by Leo XIV was pastoral abandonment disguised as tolerance. It referred to priests, bishops, and lay leaders who avoided speaking about the Church's most demanding moral teachings in order to preserve their popularity or avoid conflicts with the faithful. The directive required church leaders to proclaim the full truth of the gospel, even those teachings that challenge contemporary culture. But they were instructed to always do so with genuine love, never with condemnation, never with arrogance, and never in a spirit of superiority. Remaining silent in the face of error is not mercy, wrote Leo XIV. True compassion demands speaking sincerely about the truth. As the day progressed, the economic consequences of the document began to grow increasingly evident. The Vatican Bank reported an extraordinary surge in requests for fund withdrawals. Various dioceses attempted to move their assets before any measures related to asset redistribution could be enforced. Companies specializing in Catholic investments watched as the value of their assets dropped rapidly. Insurance companies linked to ecclesiastical institutions held emergency meetings to evaluate the financial impact of the new provisions. However, no clarifications came from the pontifical apartments. Leo XIV rejected all requests regarding financial matters and maintained absolute silence. The eighth prohibition was directed against so-called cultural Christianity, that way of living out Catholic identity solely out of family tradition, custom, or social acceptance, while in private life, the fundamental teachings of the Church are rejected or ignored. The document called on every Catholic to conduct a sincere examination of conscience, to authentically embrace the path of discipleship, or to honestly acknowledge that they were distant from a truly lived faith, rather than continuing to feed a comfortable appearance of religiosity. Lukewarm faith serves neither God nor man, wrote Leo XIV, quoting the well-known passage from the Book of Revelation addressed to the church in Laodicea. As the sun began to set over Rome, leading Catholic leaders from around the world initiated urgent communications with one another. The Archbishop of Manila made a public call for calm, although in private, he expressed deep concern over the impact these measures could have on Philippine Catholic culture. The Cardinal of Sydney issued a carefully worded statement. He expressed obedience to the Pope, but requested pastoral sensitivity during the application of the new norms. Meanwhile, many African bishops who had worked alongside Leo XIV during his years of service in the Vatican remained surprisingly silent. That absence of statements fueled widespread speculation regarding the private conversations they were holding with the Holy Father. The ninth practice, condemned by Leo XIV, was sacramental consumerism. That is, the custom of viewing baptism, confirmation, marriage, and the other sacraments as simple family celebrations or social events, rather than understanding them as spiritual commitments capable of transforming the believer's entire life. The new directive established longer preparation periods for all sacraments. It also required mandatory community service components and a public commitment to a Christian life extending far beyond the ceremony. The sacraments mark the beginning of discipleship, not its end, declared Leo XIV. When night fell over Vatican City, the Holy Father appeared briefly on the balcony of his apartments. From there, he looked out at the immense crowd gathered throughout the day in St. Peter's Square. He delivered no speech, offered no explanations. He simply raised his hand and imparted a simple blessing. Afterward, he returned inside. That image was captured by hundreds of cameras and transmitted immediately across the planet. It showed a pontiff who appeared at once, deeply resolved and fully aware of the massive weight entailed by that revolutionary decree. The Catholic world prepared to spend a night of immense uncertainty, for everyone knew that at dawn the 10th and final prohibition would be presented, the one many already considered the most difficult and demanding of all. Dawn brought no relief to the ecclesiastical storm Leo XIV had unleashed upon global Catholicism. Throughout the night, emergency meetings of the College of Cardinals were held, while groups of demonstrators began gathering outside the gates of the Vatican. Some came to voice their support, while others demanded that the Pope immediately withdraw the directive. Inside the Apostolic Palace, Leo XIV maintained his usual routine. Just like every morning, he began the day with several hours of silent prayer. Nothing in his demeanor indicated he was affected by the massive uproar caused by his decision. However, he knew perfectly well that this day would bring the revelation of the 10th and final prohibition, the one many Catholics considered the most demanding of all, and finally, the moment arrived. The 10th practice banned by Leo XIV was conditional discipleship, the deeply widespread tendency among many Catholics to follow the teachings of the Church only when they are comfortable, convenient, or socially acceptable, while quietly ignoring those gospel demands that involve personal sacrifice. This final prohibition struck directly at the heart of contemporary Catholicism. It encompassed widely varied situations: divorced Catholics who had contracted a new union without obtaining a marital annulment, and continued to approach communion as if nothing had happened. Business leaders who actively participated in parish life while systematically violating basic principles of wage justice, and families who used artificial contraceptive methods while publicly claiming to support the Church's moral teaching on sexuality. Precisely as this final prohibition was being presented, Vatican officials were holding urgent meetings with representatives from major Catholic organizations worldwide. The Knights of Columbus requested immediate clarifications regarding their investment strategies. Presidents of Catholic universities asked for exceptions related to the administration of their endowment funds. Various healthcare systems run by religious orders requested guidance on their billing policies, but Leo XIV's answer was always the exact same. The gospel contains all the guidance necessary for anyone who truly wishes to follow it. Shortly thereafter, Cardinal Martinez, completely exhausted after 2 days of coordinating crisis communications, entered the pontifical office once again. This time, he spoke with unusual candor. "Holy Father, 17 bishops have requested a formal audience to express their concerns regarding the implementation of these measures. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops is considering issuing a statement expressing disagreement with the directive. Furthermore, several major Catholic benefactors have temporarily suspended all their donations until they receive further clarification." Leo XIV was quietly writing in his personal journal. He barely raised his eyes and responded with absolute serenity. "Cardinal, when Christ drove the money changers from the temple, I doubt very much he asked for their opinion first." The cardinal fell silent. He understood that there was no longer any argument capable of altering the Holy Father's decision. The old companion he had known for so many years had become a pontiff, prepared to bear any consequence out of fidelity to his conscience. The practical repercussions of the ban on conditional discipleship began to be felt immediately in parishes around the world. Priests reported long lines of the faithful seeking spiritual guidance for personal situations they had preferred to avoid for years. Ecclesiastical tribunals specializing in marriage cases received an unprecedented number of petitions. Catholic business owners began reviewing their labor policies, asking themselves if they truly respected the principles of the gospel. Millions of believers were forced to confront a deeply uncomfortable question. How great was the gap between the faith they claimed to profess and the way they actually lived every single day? Meanwhile, major international media outlets intensified their coverage, as correspondents specializing in religious affairs grappled earnestly with the scope of this unprecedented papal intervention. Some analysts described it as the most profound transformation of Catholic practice since the Second Vatican Council, while others warned that it could trigger the greatest ecclesial crisis of modern times. In Italy, several newspapers began speculating about the possibility of a schism within the Church. However, from numerous Catholic communities in the United States, unexpected and encouraging reports arrived. Many young people, as well as numerous priests committed to working among the poorest, expressed decisive support for the Holy Father. They stated that for the first time in a long time, they felt the gospel was being proclaimed with all its power once again, stirring fresh hope in their daily labors. As evening arrived in Rome, Leo XIV finally broke his public silence. He did not call a press conference. He did not grant interviews. He simply authorized the publication of a brief written statement through official Vatican channels. The message contained barely 50 words. Nevertheless, its impact was immediate. The Church has spent too much time asking how much fidelity God demands. Today we must ask ourselves how much fidelity God deserves. Those few lines perfectly reflected the pontiff's direct style. They offered no concessions, included no exceptions, and provided none of the clarifications so many Catholic leaders had persistently demanded. His refusal to negotiate the meaning of authentic discipleship stemmed from his deep Augustinian formation and the long years of mission spent among communities where faith required real sacrifices, experiences that had clearly shaped his unyielding pastoral heart. Meanwhile, flights from various countries continued arriving in Rome. Important representatives of the Catholic world desperately sought an audience with the Holy Father. The chief executive officer of the largest Catholic healthcare system in the United States requested an urgent meeting to discuss the economic consequences of the new rules. Heads of international humanitarian aid organizations asked for explanations regarding the procedures necessary to comply with requirements related to resource redistribution. The leaders of several Catholic universities insisted on obtaining exceptions regarding their funding methods. All received the exact same response. His Holiness remains in prayer and will not receive visitors regarding matters of conscience. As the hours passed, the reaction of the Catholic world revealed divisions that had been quietly growing for decades beneath a facade of institutional unity. Numerous Catholic organizations of a progressive orientation presented Leo XIV as a truly prophetic voice, a shepherd determined to lead the Church back to the fidelity of the gospel. Conversely, various conservative groups accused him of endangering ecclesial tradition through demands they considered impossible to apply. Many moderate Catholics found themselves caught between both positions. They felt there was no longer a middle ground. A decision had to be made. And everything seemed to indicate that the Pope himself had foreseen that division from the start. Not as an accident, but as an inevitable consequence of proclaiming the gospel radically. In quiet moments of personal prayer, countless faithful souls began wrestling with these challenges in their own lives, sensing both the cost and the quiet invitation to deeper conversion. As the day drew to a close, Vatican security officials reported that St. Peter's Square held the largest gathering of people since the election of Leo XIV. Thousands of Catholics from various European countries had traveled to Rome. Some came seeking answers. Others wished to express their support. Many simply wanted to witness one of the most decisive moments in the recent history of the Church. Among the crowd, very different banners could be seen. Some proclaimed the truth of the gospel. Others asked for more pastoral mercy. The square clearly reflected the deep tension traversing global Catholicism. Meanwhile, the pontifical apartments remained completely silent. The lights remained off. Leo XIV continued his practice of remaining in prayer. The entire world awaited an answer, but the Pope seemed convinced that certain decisions could only be sustained by first remaining on one's knees before God. Night brought no rest either. Extraordinary meetings continued to take place across different parts of the world. The Pontiff's 10 prohibitions had challenged virtually every way in which modern Catholicism had accommodated itself to contemporary culture. Major parish benefactors, university presidents, hospital executives, business leaders, priests, and entire families all were beginning to face the same demand: to live an authentic, coherent faith, completely united to the gospel. Many understood that the following day would mark the beginning of a new chapter for the Church, a period of spiritual renewal, or perhaps the greatest crisis of ecclesial unity in generations. At dawn, the tension was even greater. After 3 days, the Catholic world was still trying to grasp the true scope of the 10 prohibitions promulgated by Leo XIV on that day. And millions of the faithful waited for the Pope to finally offer the explanations they had been demanding for so long, or to definitively confirm his decision. The morning report presented at the Vatican showed an extraordinary panorama. Dioceses from all continents were requesting urgent guidance. Organizations were publicly asking the pontiff to reconsider certain measures, while others demanded exactly the opposite: an immediate and complete implementation of the entire document. Global expectation had reached an unprecedented level, and all eyes were fixed on a single person, the successor of St. Peter. When noon arrived in Rome, Leo XIV finally appeared at the window of his apartments for the traditional recitation of the Angelus. The crowd gathered in St. Peter's Square was the largest since the day of his election. Thousands of Catholics had traveled from different countries seeking an answer. They needed to understand the true meaning of the spiritual earthquake that had shaken their communities over the last 3 days. Exactly at 12 o'clock, the Holy Father appeared dressed in his simple white cassock. The contrast between that austere attire and the historic balcony, from which so many popes had spoken over centuries, was profoundly symbolic. His first words would be studied by theologians and historians for many years. The gospel has not changed just because our comfort has been put to the test. With a measured, clear, and firm tone in which his characteristic Chicago accent could still be perceived, Leo XIV addressed the entire world. These 10 practices end today, not because I command it, but because Christ never authorized them. He paused briefly. Then he continued, "The Church exists to form disciples, not to accommodate personal preferences." Those words dispelled any hope of subsequent modifications. There would be no exceptions. There would be no grace periods for adaptation or more flexible interpretations. The message was completely clear. Every Catholic had to make a decision, embrace authentic discipleship, or honestly acknowledge the distance existing between their life and the gospel. As the pontiff's words reached every continent, the various bishops' conferences began to react. The Cardinal Archbishop of Manila issued a statement reaffirming his obedience to the Pope, though he insisted on the need to apply the measures with pastoral sensitivity. The Archbishop of Dublin publicly expressed his concern regarding the implementation timeline. Meanwhile, several Brazilian bishops, inspired by their pastoral experience and the tradition of the social doctrine of the Church, expressed prudent support for the Holy Father's strong call in favor of social justice. However, the biggest surprise came from Africa. Many of the bishops who had worked alongside Leo XIV during his years of service in the Vatican published a joint declaration fully supporting his invitation to live an authentic Catholic witness. The practical consequences of that decision began to become visible immediately, touching institutions and individuals in ways both sobering and profound. The University of Notre Dame convened extraordinary meetings to review the administration of its endowment funds. Various Catholic hospitals initiated modifications to their billing systems, seeking to align with the new evangelical demands. Parishes with significant financial reserves began studying redistribution programs intended for aid projects supporting people in poverty. The Pope's decision to demand immediate implementation eliminated any possibility of a slow or gradual transition, compelling many to confront long-avoided realities in their own communities. International Catholic organizations also had to act quickly. The Knights of Columbus announced that they would seek canonical legal counsel regarding the management of their investments. Major Catholic humanitarian aid agencies began reviewing all their internal procedures. Leading Catholic universities initiated extraordinary audits of their fundraising campaigns and their relationships with major benefactors. The speed with which the new provisions had to be applied prevented reliance on the quiet methods of adaptation that had characterized many ecclesial reforms in the past, leaving leaders to navigate unfamiliar territory with a mixture of anxiety and resolve. As late afternoon began to settle over Rome, Leo XIV made a completely unexpected decision. A decision that would demonstrate just how far he was willing to go. He publicly announced that he would personally visit 3 specific places representing the exact problems denounced in his 10 prohibitions. First, a wealthy parish that had invested millions in unnecessary renovations, while homeless shelters in the same city remained without sufficient resources. Next, a Catholic university that maintained massive endowment funds while many of its students graduated carrying unpayable debt. And finally, a company that proudly proclaimed its Catholic identity while maintaining labor practices that were clearly unjust toward its workers. The announcement caused genuine shock among leaders of Catholic institutions worldwide. The mere fact that the Pope was willing to publicly call out organizations that failed to obey his directives represented an exercise of pontifical authority practically unprecedented in the recent history of the Church. Previous popes had generally preferred to exert pressure through private conversations and discreet diplomatic gestures. Leo XIV, in contrast, seemed determined to practice a public accountability inspired by his missionary experience and the prophetic tradition of St. Augustine. Within hours, communications directed to the Vatican increased even further. Financially privileged parishes announced new aid programs for the poor. Catholic universities urgently modified some of their financial policies. Business owners who publicly identified as Catholic began revising their working conditions to align them with the gospel. The sheer possibility of a direct intervention by the Holy Father had achieved, in a few hours, a level of response that centuries of ecclesiastical diplomacy had never managed to accomplish, stirring both admiration and unease in the hearts of many. As the sun began to set over Rome, Leo XIV concluded that historic weekend with one final written statement. Those words would be remembered as one of the most important pontifical declarations of the modern era. The church that accommodates sin serves neither God nor man. We will be disciples, or we will be something else, but we will not be comfortable Christians. The clarity of that declaration eliminated any hope of compromise or a gradual implementation of the 10 prohibitions. The Holy Father refused to introduce exceptions, refused to establish extended timelines, and rejected any possibility of opening space for more flexible interpretations. In doing so, he forced global Catholicism to face a deeply uncomfortable choice, choosing between authentic discipleship or a comfortable religiosity. One could sense how these words lingered with ordinary believers, prompting quiet examinations of conscience in chapels and homes far beyond the Vatican walls. When night fell over Vatican City, Leo returned to his private chapel to offer his prayers. Meanwhile, hundreds of millions of Catholics worldwide tried to comprehend the most challenging papal directive in contemporary history. In barely 3 days, the first pope, born in the United States, had accomplished something that centuries of diplomatic prudence had failed to achieve. He had forced the Church to seriously examine to what extent it truly lived the gospel, and to what extent it simply coexisted comfortably with the dominant culture. The consequences of that weekend would continue to transform Catholicism for generations. The 10 prohibitions had brought a radical end to the comfortable coexistence between many contemporary practices and the traditional teaching of the Church. The following day would mark the beginning of an authentic spiritual renewal, or the start of the deepest ecclesial crisis since the Protestant Reformation. Whatever the outcome, the Chicago-born Pope had ensured that no one would ever again confuse the Catholic faith with a religiosity based solely on comfort. Repercussions continued to spread through all levels of the ecclesiastical hierarchy. Seminaries began reporting a notable increase in the number of young men interested in the priesthood, with many stating they felt inspired by the Pope's call to a radically authentic faith. At the same time, parishes with older populations struggled to adapt to the new demands. Many of the faithful fought to reconcile decades of deeply rooted customs with the new expectations set forth by Leo XIV. Spontaneous movements began to emerge in various cities around the world. Groups of young Catholics organized gatherings to study how to apply the 10 prohibitions in daily life. Those communities quickly earned a popular name: Leonin communities. They rapidly became meeting places for those desiring to experience a true spiritual transformation. Meanwhile, in Rome, the Vatican initiated the necessary preparations to oversee the implementation of the new rules. Commissions were established to review diocesan finances, evaluate parish practices, and verify compliance with the new provisions. The administrative structure required to enforce the prohibitions grew rapidly. Everything indicated that these measures were not mere pastoral recommendations, but mandatory decrees. Various critics within the Church claimed that such a strict oversight system contradicted the spirit of freedom inherent to the gospel. Those supporting the Holy Father responded firmly. There can be no authenticity without accountability. Very soon, theological debate began to intensify. Seminaries, Catholic universities, academic journals, and study centers launched into lengthy debates. Was the Church recovering the radicalism of its origins? Or was it abandoning centuries of prudent development? Opinions divided even the specialists. Theologians clashed with other theologians, bishops disagreed with other bishops, and priests interpreted the exact same document in completely different ways. Some elderly prelates who had served under several pontificates privately confessed to feeling deeply astonished by the speed and firmness of the changes driven by Leo XIV. Others, especially those from developing countries, celebrated these decisions as a prophetic confirmation of the struggles they had waged for decades against inequality and hypocrisy. Secular news media also began dedicating increasing attention to the phenomenon. Political analysts debated whether the Pope's economic proposals could be interpreted as political intervention presented in religious language. Cultural commentators discussed the consequences that genuine wealth redistribution by Catholic institutions would have on Western capitalism. Economists prepared studies attempting to calculate what would happen if all Catholic entities in the world simultaneously liquidated their surplus assets. The figures were stunning. Billions of dollars could be directly allocated to aid programs for people living in poverty. An economic shift of such magnitude was unprecedented in contemporary history. Major corporations that had maintained close relationships with Catholic institutions for years began preparing contingency plans. Banks, tasked with managing the investments of numerous dioceses, had to answer increasingly difficult questions about the future of their operations. The industry, dedicated to religious services, publishers, devotional item manufacturers, religious tourism companies, all began showing deep concern over the new restrictions related to spiritual materialism. While institutions tried to adapt, individuals began experiencing much deeper changes. In homes across different continents, Catholic families began holding difficult conversations around the dinner table. Many parents explained to their children why certain toys would be donated, why certain vacations would be canceled, and why the whole family's lifestyle needed to become much simpler. Numerous married couples reflected anew on family decisions in light of the teachings contained in the new prohibitions. Catholic business leaders initiated a complete review of their compensation structures, analyzing benefits offered to their workers, examining their supply chains, and carefully reviewing each of their labor practices. Many discovered that genuinely applying the gospel meant reducing even their own income to guarantee truly fair wages. Others realized an even more uncomfortable reality, that entire economic sectors were built on forms of exploitation impossible to correct solely through small individual changes. The prohibitions forced Catholics to confront their participation in unjust structures in a way that simple charity had never managed to achieve. Shortly thereafter, a well-known executive publicly announced his resignation from a major corporation, explaining that the company's practices were incompatible with the new pontifical guidelines. His resignation letter spread rapidly across the world. Many considered it an inspiring example, while others labeled it an exaggeration. Meanwhile, numerous testimonies of conversion began to surface. An investment banker in New York liquidated a large portion of his wealth and entered the seminary. A prominent figure in Los Angeles high society sold her mansion, moved into a much more modest apartment, and decided to dedicate her life to serving homeless individuals. In Brazil, a politician voluntarily resigned from office upon recognizing that his public career was incompatible with the demands of justice proclaimed by the gospel. Naturally, skeptical voices also emerged. Some claimed those stories were nothing more than attempts to gain attention. Others spoke of psychological manipulation promoted by the church itself. However, many believers viewed those events as visible signs of the working of God's grace. Perhaps the truth lay somewhere in between. There were deeply sincere conversions, others that possibly sought public recognition, and also many people honestly struggling to distinguish between authentic interior transformation and self-deception. While all this was happening, Leo XIV remained surprisingly faithful to his personal lifestyle. He refused to grant media interviews, limited his public appearances strictly to essential liturgical celebrations, and continued communicating primarily through brief homilies, simple written messages, and above all, the example of his own life. Little by little, various testimonies from inside the Vatican began to spread. It was reported that the Holy Father had removed much of the luxurious furniture from his quarters, donated numerous valuable items to charitable works, and personally insisted on eating extremely simple meals. It also became known that he began each day well before dawn with long hours of prayer, personally assisted with manual labor within the Vatican gardens, and regularly visited hospitals and correctional facilities in Rome without advance notice. That personal coherence conferred immense moral authority upon all the demands contained in his 10 prohibitions. Even many of his critics acknowledged a reality difficult to deny. They might deeply disagree with his decisions, but it was almost impossible to question the authenticity with which he himself lived what he preached. The personal figure of Leo XIV gradually began to detach from the debate surrounding his guidelines. Many did not fully share his measures, yet they retained deep respect for the man who had promulgated them. With the passing weeks, certain patterns in the response of global Catholicism began to take shape. Regions with a strong tradition of social commitment, various parts of Latin America, much of sub-Saharan Africa, and numerous communities in Asia, enthusiastically welcomed the 10 prohibitions. Conversely, those places where Catholicism had developed a much closer relationship with economic power and influential structures, such as much of Western Europe, North America, and certain sectors in South America, showed far greater resistance. The geography of acceptance and rejection seemed to coincide disturbingly with the broad maps of global economic inequality. In poorer countries, many of the faithful decisively supported a pope who denounced the accumulation of wealth, whereas in numerous wealthier nations, opposition proved considerably more intense. Naturally, there were exceptions. In the United States, numerous groups of young Catholics enthusiastically embraced the new teachings, and there were also privileged sectors in developing nations that openly rejected the reforms. Nevertheless, the general trend was evident. That reality led many Catholics in Europe and North America to undergo a profound examination of conscience. Was their resistance truly born of theological convictions, or from the desire to protect certain economic privileges? Those advocating for a more gradual application insisted that pastoral prudence required moving slowly. Their critics countered that, all too often, the word prudence ended up becoming merely a justification for preserving unjust situations. Meanwhile, the debate over the true meaning of the 10 prohibitions continued to grow. Universities, seminaries, parishes, families, and social media networks transformed into arenas for intense dialogue. Many wondered whether Leo XIV was recovering the authenticity of early Christianity or imposing an excessively personal interpretation of the gospel. Only time would offer a definitive answer. The only indisputable fact was that he had succeeded in deeply shaking global Catholicism. The question was no longer whether the Church would change, because change had already begun. The real question was discovering what form that transformation would take and whether the Church could navigate it while remaining united. As the weeks advanced, rumors regarding the possibility of a schism began to circulate discreetly. Some more conservative cardinals held private conversations, questioning whether certain decisions by Leo XIV might justify extraordinary measures. Canon law experts began reviewing ancient historical precedents related to conflicts between pontiffs and sectors of the hierarchy. Although most of those conversations remained far from public view, their very existence demonstrated the depth of the crisis. At the same time, the Holy Father's supporters began organizing in an increasingly solid manner. Catholic organizations from various countries coordinated initiatives to apply the 10 prohibitions. Committed parishes shared experiences and projects, and youth movements multiplied gatherings aimed at publicly defending the pontiff's proposal. Polarization was rising, but commitment was growing as well. Paradoxically, many parishes began experiencing a significant increase in attendance at Holy Mass. Confessionals that had remained nearly empty for years were filling up again, and Bible study groups appeared in communities where none had existed for decades. Thousands of the faithful sought to better understand the Scriptures in order to respond faithfully to the challenges posed by the Pope. Unexpectedly, the controversy was managing to awaken a spiritual renewal that numerous previous pastoral programs had failed to ignite, seemingly confirming an intuition of Leo XIV. Sometimes the truth that uncomfortable awakens more hearts than the message that merely seeks to please. Many historians began comparing those events to other great moments in church history. Some recalled the deep tensions that followed the Second Vatican Council. Others evoked ancient conflicts that ultimately caused permanent divisions within Christianity. History offered reasons for hope, but also very serious warnings. One thing seemed indisputable. Catholicism had arrived at a decisive moment. The 10 prohibitions finally forced an answer to a question postponed for generations. Is the Church called to be a community of disciples radically committed to the gospel, or a religious institution accommodated to the dominant culture? Can it be both things at the same time? Leo XIV was convinced it could not. He believed that authenticity demanded a choice, that permanent compromise with concessions ultimately weakened Christian witness, and that the only possible path required profound renewal. Only the future would reveal how the millions of Catholics spread across the world would respond, but that question could no longer be avoided. The sentence concluding the original directive continued to resound with power. We will be disciples. Or we will be something else, but we will not be comfortable Christians. The future of Catholicism would depend on the answer each believer offered to that call, a choice weighing heavily on hearts everywhere. And so, in the silence of his private chapel, Pope Leo XIV knelt once again. Silent tears streamed down his face as he offered a final prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, you who drove the money changers from the temple, give me the courage necessary to continue. Not according to my will, but according to yours. If I have made a mistake, correct me. If I have spoken according to your truth, sustain me. I see my brothers and sisters suffering, some because of poverty, others imprisoned by wealth that holds their souls captive. I see your church deeply divided, but I prefer a division born of sincerity over a unity built on hypocrisy. Forgive me if I have ever been too severe, but never permit me to be a coward. The gospel was never comfortable. Your cross was never easy to bear. If I must endure criticism for the love of truth, so be it. Bless all Catholics in this difficult hour. Grant humility to those who support me. Give discernment to those who oppose me. And grant us all authentic conversion. May these prohibitions not be remembered as my legacy, but as a step toward your kingdom. May the Church awaken, may the poor be lifted up, and may your holy name be glorified forever. Amen. In that intimate moment of vulnerability, one senses the profound humanity of a shepherd bearing an immense burden. His prayer echoing the struggles faced by countless faithful souls navigating uncertainty and conviction alike. If this message made you reflect, continue delving deeper into topics that invite us to look at faith with seriousness, a critical spirit, and a sincere desire for conversion. Share this content with those who might find in it an opportunity to reflect, and tell us in the comments from where you are joining us.